I am Maya, 30 years old, and my father tried to have me declared legally insane just to steal my inheritance. In front of a packed courtroom, he screamed that I was an embarrassment, a college dropout with absolutely nothing to my name. I stayed silent while the judge leaned forward and asked him if he really had no idea who I was. His attorney froze, and my father's face went completely pale when the truth dropped. Before I tell you how I dismantled his entire life, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to build your empire in the shadows while your family prayed for your downfall. The betrayal did not start in a courtroom. It started at our annual Juneteenth cookout. The air was thick with hickory smoke, sweet barbecue sauce, and southern summer heat. My uncle was manning the grill, old-school rhythm and blues played through the outdoor speakers, and the backyard was packed with dozens of cousins, family friends, and aunties fanning themselves on the patio. It was supposed to be a celebration of freedom and family. Instead, it became the exact moment my family tried to put me in chains. I was sitting quietly at one of the plastic tables, eating and avoiding interrogations about my single life. Suddenly, a heavy, thick stack of legal documents slammed down right on top of my plate. Grease from my ribs instantly soaked into the manila envelope, staining the crisp white paper inside. I looked up slowly. Standing over me was Bradley, my sister Chloe's white husband. He was a corporate finance broker who carried himself with an unbearable sense of superiority. He adjusted his expensive designer polo shirt, making sure he had the attention of every single family member within earshot. The music seemed to fade into the background as conversations abruptly stopped. "I am sorry to ruin the holiday," Maya Bradley announced loudly. His voice boomed across the yard, dripping with a condescending fake sympathy that made my stomach churn. "But your father and I had to serve you these papers today. It is a court summons for a formal conservatorship. We are officially petitioning the state to have you declared mentally incompetent. We have to step in and seize control of your grandmother's estate before you completely destroy it." A collective gasp rippled through the backyard. Forks were lowered, drinks were set down. The aunties stared at me with wide eyes, whispering behind their hands. Bradley stood there with a triumphant smirk, fully expecting me to burst into tears, to scream, to cause the exact kind of unstable scene they needed to prove their case in front of all these witnesses. I did not cry. I did not raise my voice. I calmly picked up a paper napkin and wiped the barbecue sauce from my fingers. I picked up the grease-stained stack of legal papers, stood up from my folding chair, and casually dropped the entire summons into the nearby garbage can, right on top of some discarded corn cobs. Bradley's smirk faltered. Before he could speak, my younger sister Chloe sprang into action. As the golden child of the family, she had perfected the art of playing the victim. She rushed forward, grabbing Bradley's arm and bursting into loud theatrical tears. "Look at her!" Chloe shrieked, turning to address the crowd of stunned relatives. "She is completely crazy. She does not even understand what is happening. We are just trying to help her." Ever since she dropped out of her master's program 8 years ago, she has been a complete mess. We cannot just sit back and let a college dropout squander the historic land Grandma left behind. It is a stain on our family's black excellence. My father, Marcus, stepped out from the crowd of onlookers. He was the owner of a local car dealership chain and a prominent leader at our church. To the community, he was a pillar of success. To me, he was a narcissistic tyrant who cared only about his image. He puffed out his chest and pointed a finger at me, shaking his head with exaggerated disappointment. "Chloe is right," my father declared loudly, ensuring the church elders in the corner heard every word. "You have been a disappointment for a decade, Maya. You hide away in your apartment doing freelance nonsense, while your sister and brother-in-law build real wealth. Your grandmother was not in her right mind when she left that property to you instead of me. We are taking it back. We are saving our legacy from your incompetence." I looked at the three of them. My father desperate to steal a property to save his own failing image. My sister crying crocodile tears out of pure jealousy. And Bradley, the arrogant outsider, who thought his white corporate privilege gave him the right to bully a black woman in her own family's backyard. They really thought I was weak. They really thought I was the broke, reclusive dropout they had spent years gossiping about. They had absolutely no idea I was the hidden founder of a multi-million-dollar venture capital firm, holding the keys to their financial destruction. I picked up my heavy leather purse and slung it over my shoulder. The yard was dead silent, every eye fixed on me, waiting for my emotional breakdown. I smiled politely at my father, then turned my attention back to my brother-in-law. I took 2 steps toward Bradley, invading his personal space until he nervously shifted his weight. I leaned in close, keeping my voice calm but projecting it clearly enough for the front row of gossiping aunties to hear every single syllable. Your lease payment on that white Mercedes parked out front is exactly 3 months past due. Bradley, I whispered smoothly. The financing company has been looking for it all week. If I were you, I would go move it right now before the tow truck gets here. Bradley's face went completely pale. The arrogant smirk vanished from his face, entirely replaced by a look of sheer panic. He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out at all. Right on cue, the heavy, unmistakable rumble of a massive diesel engine echoed from the street. The loud beep of a commercial tow truck backing into the driveway shattered the silence. I gave my crying sister one last smile, turned my back on all my stunned family, and walked calmly toward the front gate. The very next morning, violent pounding rattled the door of my apartment. I sat at my kitchen counter sipping espresso and reviewing my global investment portfolios on a secured tablet. This modest, cramped apartment was a deliberate decoy. I kept this place to maintain the illusion that I was exactly what my family thought I was, a struggling dropout. It was the perfect camouflage for my actual life. I logged out of my corporate accounts and walked to the door. When I turned the deadbolt, my father pushed his way inside without an invitation. Bradley was right on his heels, his face red and puffy. He was still enraged about watching his luxury car get dragged down the street yesterday. Trailing nervously behind them was a man holding a scuffed briefcase, wearing a suit that screamed bargain bin legal counsel. My father did not say good morning. He marched into my living space, sneering at the second-hand furniture, and slapped a stack of papers right in the center of my dining table. Bradley stood next to him, crossing his arms and puffing out his chest, desperately trying to reclaim the alpha male status he lost at the cookout. We are giving you one last chance to do this the easy way, my father barked. You humiliated me in front of my congregation yesterday. Because I am a gracious man, I brought my attorney to offer you a way out of your miserable existence. You are going to sign this power of attorney right now. You will relinquish all legal rights to your grandmother's estate over to me. In exchange, I will guarantee you a monthly allowance of $2,000. $2,000? I almost laughed out loud. They wanted to steal a multi-million-dollar commercial plot for the price of a cheap studio rental. Before I could respond to the insulting offer, Bradley stepped forward. He held up his hand to stop my father, acting as if he were the master negotiator. Let me explain this in terms you can actually understand, Maya, Bradley said, speaking slowly like I was a simple-minded child. Real estate is a highly complex beast. You have property taxes, depreciation, zoning liabilities, and capital gains to worry about. A college dropout who sits alone in a cheap apartment simply does not have the financial literacy to manage assets with zero liquidity. You are sitting on a toxic asset. You have no capital to develop the land, and the carrying costs will bankrupt you within a year. Take the allowance your father is offering. Buy yourself some nice clothes. Get your life together. Let the educated men handle the adult business. I took a slow sip of my espresso, letting the silence stretch in the room, until Bradley shifted uncomfortably on his feet. You really brought a bottom-tier ambulance chaser and a failed finance broker to my house to intimidate me? I asked, keeping my voice dangerously quiet. Bradley's face flushed deep crimson with anger, but I did not let him interrupt. I walked over to the table and tapped my manicured fingernail directly on the second page of their pathetic legal contract. First of all, Bradley, I said, maintaining unwavering eye contact. You listed the property under a residential tax bracket. Grandma's land sits directly on the border of the newly approved Metropolitan Tech District. It was rezoned for high-density commercial use 6 months ago. By evaluating it as a residential lot, your math is off by approximately 85%. Furthermore, your supposed toxic asset argument completely ignores the municipal tax abatements specifically available for minority-owned legacy properties in this state. which entirely nullifies your carrying cost calculation. You are trying to steal a lucrative commercial hub using the faulty math of a first-year community college student. You should be embarrassed to call yourself a broker. The room went completely dead silent. Mr. Higgins started sweating profusely. He hurriedly pulled the contract toward him, his eyes darting frantically across the page as he realized I had just instantly dismantled his entire legal strategy in under 60 seconds. Bradley opened his mouth, closed it, and started stammering loudly, trying desperately to find a way to reassert his dominance. But the financial jargon he loved to hide behind had just been weaponized against him, and he was completely unarmed and exposed. My father watched this exchange with pure horror, but his shock quickly mutated into violent rage. The polished facade of the righteous church leader vanished completely, replaced by the tyrant I knew too well. He slammed his fist down on my cheap dining table so hard my coffee mug rattled. "You listen to me, you ungrateful wretch!" My father screamed, his face inches from mine, spit flying from his lips. "I do not care what kind of internet research you did to sound smart today. You are a complete disgrace to this family. You will sign that paper right now, or I swear to God I will have you institutionalized before the trial even begins. I will find a doctor to declare you a danger to yourself. You will be locked in a white room, heavily medicated, and I will take that land as your legal guardian anyway. You have absolutely nothing. You are nothing." I did not flinch. I did not step back. I looked at the man who had spent my entire life tearing me down, and I felt nothing but pity for his absolute ignorance. I reached into the pocket of my cardigan and pulled out a crisp, white wax-sealed envelope. I slid it slowly across the table until it rested right against his clenched fist. "See you in court, Dad," I said smoothly, a cold smile forming on my lips. "By the way, you should really check which firm just bought the $40 million debt on your failing dealerships." My father snatched his hand back from the envelope as if the parchment caught fire. The vein in his neck throbbed violently, but the absolute panic in his eyes betrayed the furious mask he wore. He grabbed the lawyer, shoved Bradley toward the exit, and slammed my door so hard the drywall cracked. He thought he could outrun reality by hiding behind his community status, but pride is a dangerous shield. 2 days later, the real retaliation began. I was reviewing quarterly acquisition reports on my sofa when a loud, rhythmic chanting echoed from the hallway outside my door. It was not the aggressive pounding from before. It was a coordinated theatrical display of spiritual warfare. I walked to the peephole and sighed. My father had weaponized the local church. Standing on the landing of my apartment complex was Pastor Thomas, flanked by 5 senior church elders, and the formidable mothers of the board, all dressed in their immaculate Sunday suits and oversized hats. My father stood right in the center of them, clutching a worn leather Bible to his chest, wiping away fake, agonizing tears. He had brought the entire spiritual weight of the community to stage an unannounced prayer intervention for his deluded, mentally incompetent daughter. He knew exactly how much our community valued church hierarchy. He expected me to cower in shame, open the door, and submit to the spiritual authority he had manipulated. I unlocked the deadbolt and pulled the door wide open, stepping squarely into the doorframe. I did not invite them inside. I crossed my arms and stared down the impromptu congregation. "Lord Jesus, we come to you today to cast out the spirit of confusion and madness from this young woman," Pastor Thomas boomed, raising a hand over my head as if I were possessed. "We pray for Maya, Lord. We pray you restore her mind so she can honor her father, submit to her family, and stop this destructive path of rebellion against the people who raised her." "Amen," the church mothers chorused, shooting me looks of deep, condescending pity. "Your father is so heartbroken," Maya, Sister Jenkins, scolded, shaking her head. "A child turning her back on her family and losing her mind is a complete tragedy. Let us inside so we can lay hands on you and anoint this home. We need to save your soul before you end up in an institution." I held up my hand, stopping Sister Jenkins right as she reached for my doorknob. My posture remained entirely relaxed, but my voice carried a sharp, freezing authority that immediately silenced the hallway. "Nobody is laying hands on me, and absolutely nobody is stepping foot inside my home," I said, making direct eye contact with the pastor. "I find it incredibly fascinating, Pastor Thomas, that you have the time to stage an intervention for my supposed mental illness. But you apparently do not have the time to review your own church financial ledgers. My father stepped forward quickly, his eyes wide with desperate warning. Maya, stop this foolishness right now. Do not disrespect the pastor. We are here out of love to heal your broken mind. I ignored my father completely and kept my gaze fixed on the clergyman. You came here to support a pillar of your community, pastor. I continued smoothly. My father likely told you I am crazy, that I am throwing away my grandmother's legacy, and that I need his legal guardianship to survive. But did this pillar of the community happen to mention his commitment to your new community center? Did he mention the $200,000 pledge he publicly promised the congregation 6 months ago? Pastor Thomas lowered his hand, his brow furrowing in confusion. Brother Marcus is a faithful servant. His pledge is securing the new youth wing. We break ground next month. No, Pastor, you are not, I replied, my voice echoing clearly in the quiet hallway. My father has not given the church a single dime of that pledge. In fact, if you call your bank manager right now, you will discover that the 3 initial checks he wrote for the building fund have all bounced due to insufficient funds. He is completely bankrupt. His dealerships are drowning in debt, and he brought you here today to bully me into signing over my grandmother's commercial real estate so he can sell it to cover his own massive financial failures. He is using your faith to steal from his own daughter. The silence that fell over the church elders was absolute. Sister Jenkins gasped, clutching her purse tightly. Pastor Thomas turned his head slowly, looking at my father with a mixture of shock and dawning realization. Marcus, the pastor asked, his booming voice suddenly very quiet and dangerous. Is this true? Tell me those checks cleared. Tell me you did not bring the sanctity of our church into a scheme to steal your daughter's inheritance. My father started sweating profusely. The holy, heartbroken patriarch routine vanished instantly. He stammered, pulling at his collar, his eyes darting frantically between the elders who were now glaring at him with pure disgust. Pastor, you cannot listen to her. I told you she is sick. She makes things up. She is totally unstable. I did not argue. I simply pulled my phone from my pocket, opened a secure banking application, and turned the screen toward Pastor Thomas. I displayed the official bounce check alerts from my father's primary business account data I had legally acquired when my firm purchased his debt. The red letters spelling out insufficient funds glowed brightly in the dim hallway. The church mothers did not need to see anything else. The sheer humiliation of being used as pawns in a fraudulent scheme hit them instantly. Sister Jenkins turned her back on my father, muttering about false prophets and wolves in sheep's clothing. Pastor Thomas looked at my father with absolute contempt. Do not ever call on this ministry again, Marcus the pastor said coldly. You will be hearing from the church board regarding your standing in our congregation. And may God forgive you for what you tried to do to your own child today. The group turned and marched down the hallway in a unified, indignant huff, leaving my father standing completely alone in front of my door. His grand religious manipulation had collapsed spectacularly. He glared at me, his fists clenched tight, shaking with a rage so deep he could not even form a coherent sentence. He spun around and stormed down the stairs, his carefully crafted community reputation utterly destroyed. I watched him go, feeling a deep, satisfying calm wash over me. Before I could even step back inside my apartment, my phone rang in my hand. I glanced at the caller ID and smiled. It was my secret executive assistant. I answered the call, leaning against the doorframe. Go ahead. Ma'am, the assistant said, her tone crisp and professional. The Securities and Exchange Commission has officially launched a shadow investigation into Bradley's brokerage firm, exactly as you arranged. The bait worked. I smiled, looking down the empty hallway where my father had just fled. Excellent work, I replied. Let them dig. The next morning, I took my time enjoying the quiet atmosphere at a high-end, Black-owned coffee shop downtown. The scent of roasted beans and warm pastries filled the air. I sat at a corner table reviewing a digital portfolio of emerging startups, minding my own business. That peace shattered the moment the front door swung open and Chloe marched inside. My younger sister had always possessed a supernatural radar for my whereabouts whenever she needed a target for her theatrics. Chloe spotted me instantly. She did not just walk over. She performed a frantic rushing glide across the polished hardwood floor. She wore a pristine designer trench coat and carried a handbag that cost more than most people's monthly rent, her perfect golden child aesthetic fully intact. But her face was twisted into a mask of exaggerated, overwhelming grief. Maya, she cried out, her voice loud enough to guarantee that every single patron and barista in the cafe turned to look at us. Maya, please tell me you are okay. She collapsed into the chair across from me, burying her face in her manicured hands and unleashing a loud, dramatic sob. She was putting on a masterclass in manipulation, making sure everyone around us viewed her as the loving, heartbroken sister trying to save a lost cause. I did not flinch. I slowly picked up my ceramic cup, took a measured sip of my espresso, and waited for her to deliver the script our father had undoubtedly written for her. "Why are you doing this to us?" Chloe wailed, reaching across the table to grab my hand. I swiftly pulled my hand back, letting her grasp empty air. She sniffled loudly, wiping away a non-existent tear. "Dad is absolutely devastated. He just wants to help you. We all do. You have been so sick, Maya. You have been pushing us away ever since you dropped out of school, and now you are acting completely unhinged. Just sign the paperwork for Grandma's property. Let Dad take over the estate, so we can get you the psychiatric help you desperately need. We can be a happy family again if you just stop this crazy rebellion." The people at the neighboring tables were staring openly, now their expressions full of pity for the beautiful sobbing woman dealing with her unstable older sister. Chloe soaked up their sympathetic glances like sunshine. She thrived on being the flawless daughter, the one who did everything right, married the wealthy finance broker, and stayed perfectly aligned with my father's toxic empire. "Are you finished?" I asked, my voice flat and entirely devoid of emotion. Chloe stopped fake crying for a fraction of a second, her eyes narrowing in genuine irritation before she forced the wobbly, tragic persona back onto her face. "Maya, please do not shut me out. We are blood. Bradley and I are losing sleep worrying about your mental state. You cannot manage that land. You are going to ruin Grandma's legacy." I set my espresso cup down on the saucer with a quiet, deliberate clink. I leaned forward, resting my elbows on the table, closing the distance between us. I did not raise my voice, but my tone dropped to a sharp, icy register that completely paralyzed her. "You and Bradley are losing sleep," I whispered, staring directly into her wide eyes. "That is fascinating, Chloe. But I doubt Bradley is losing sleep over my mental state. I imagine he would be losing a lot more sleep if he knew about the secret American Express account you opened under your maiden name." Chloe froze. The theatrical tears vanished instantly. Her breathing hitched and the color began to drain rapidly from her perfectly contoured face. I kept my gaze locked onto hers, reciting the data I had pulled from her financial background check with ruthless precision. "Let us talk about Grandma's legacy and financial competence." I continued smoothly. "You currently owe $84,622 on that hidden platinum card. You spent $12,000 in Paris last month on a girls' trip you told Bradley was fully sponsored by your firm. You dropped another $30,000 on designer handbags and shoes to maintain this flawless image of black excellence you love projecting at church. You are drowning in debt, Chloe. You are paying minimum balances with cash advances from a secret line of credit. And your husband, the arrogant finance expert, is entirely clueless that his perfect wife is a walking financial disaster." Chloe looked like she had just been struck by lightning. Her mouth opened, but only a quiet, strangled gasp came out. She glanced around the coffee shop frantically, suddenly terrified that the patrons who were pitying me a minute ago might overhear her humiliating reality. "You came here to call me crazy," I said, leaning back in my chair and crossing my legs. "You came here to put on a show and beg for Grandma's property because you and Dad are both completely bankrupt. You need the sale of that land to pay off your secret debts before Bradley finds out and divorces you. You are not a concerned sister. You are a desperate broke woman wearing a coat you cannot afford." Chloe stood up so fast her chair scraped violently against the floor. Her face was now a pale, ashen mask of pure panic and fury. She was breathing heavily, her chest heaving as her perfect golden child facade shattered into a million irreparable pieces. She pointed a trembling finger at me. "You are a monster," she hissed, dropping the sweet sister act entirely. "You are a vindictive, evil monster, and Dad is right to want you locked away." I smiled warmly at her. Have a lovely morning, Chloe. She spun around, desperate to make a dignified, dramatic exit and salvage whatever pride she had left in front of the watching cafe. She marched over to the counter, throwing her designer handbag over her shoulder. She ordered a large matcha latte to go, determined to look unbothered as she slammed her shiny platinum card onto the counter. The barista, a young woman who had been watching the entire exchange, picked up the card and swiped it through the register system. The machine beeped a harsh negative tone. The barista frowned, tapped the screen a few times, and swiped the card again. Another loud, denying beep echoed through the quiet shop. Chloe tapped her manicured fingers impatiently against the counter. Just run it as credit, she snapped, her voice dripping with unwarranted arrogance. The barista looked up from the monitor, her expression a mixture of confusion and second-hand embarrassment. She held the card up and spoke loudly, her voice carrying across the silent, staring coffee shop. Ma'am, I cannot run it. This card has been frozen by the issuer. Chloe stood frozen at the coffee counter, her face burning. The barista held the rejected platinum card in midair, waiting for payment while the cafe watched. I did not stay to watch my sister scramble for cash. I picked up my tablet and walked out into the crisp air, leaving her to face her ruin. My cell phone buzzed the entire walk home with frantic text messages from my father, but I ignored them all. People losing control always make sloppy mistakes. That desperation arrived 2 days later. I was brewing tea when a sharp knock hammered against my door. I checked the security feed. In the hallway was my father, Marcus, wearing his best church suit. Beside him stood an older white man carrying a thick leather briefcase and wearing an expression of clinical arrogance. I unlocked the door, my face a mask of complete serenity. My father did not wait for an invitation. He pushed into my living space, gesturing for the white man to follow. Maya, this has gone on long enough, my father declared, his voice booming like a sermon. Your erratic behavior at the coffee shop was the final straw. Chloe called me in tears. You are unhinged. Because I love you and want to save your life, I brought Dr. Sterling here. He is a highly respected psychiatrist, and he will conduct a preliminary evaluation for the conservatorship hearing. Dr. Sterling stepped forward, looking around my modest apartment with undisguised disdain. He did not ask for my consent. He simply unclasped his briefcase, pulled out a yellow legal pad, and clicked his expensive pen. Please sit down, Maya, Dr. Sterling said, using the patronizing tone professionals use when speaking to toddlers. Your father has expressed deep concern regarding your mental decline. We are here to help transition you into a managed care facility so your assets can be protected by a competent guardian. I did not yell. I did not kick them out. That would only give them the reaction they needed for their fake report. Instead, I smiled warmly, gestured to the sofa, and offered them tea. My unnatural calmness unsettled my father, but Dr. Sterling took it as a symptom of emotional detachment. For 45 minutes, I sat perfectly still while the doctor launched a barrage of highly manipulative leading questions designed to corner me into a diagnosis of insanity. Your family reports that you suffer from grandiose delusions, Dr. Sterling noted, scribbling furiously. They state you believe you possess vast wealth despite having no verifiable income, and that you exhibit paranoid hostility toward your sister. Do you feel persecuted by the people who love you most? I crossed my legs. I do not feel persecuted at all, doctor, I replied smoothly. And I do not suffer from grandiose delusions. I suffer from a family that relies on my perceived failure to validate their egos. My sister's financial instability is a documented reality, not a paranoid fantasy. As a professional, you should understand the critical difference between a verifiable fact and a delusion. Dr. Sterling frowned clearly, unaccustomed to a supposed psychiatric patient dissecting his questions with surgical precision. He tried another angle, pushing harder, his white male privilege flaring up as he attempted to dominate the conversation. You live in an isolated environment, Maya. You dropped out of a prestigious graduate program. You refuse to engage with your community, and you exhibit extreme emotional blunting. Your father tells me you are incapable of managing a checking account, let alone a commercial property. Denial is a symptom of cognitive decline. I leaned forward. I find your clinical assessment fascinating, Dr. Sterling. You determined my cognitive decline based entirely on hearsay from a man who currently has 4 creditors, threatening to seize his business assets. Tell me, does standard psychiatric protocol involve diagnosing a patient based on the financial desperation of a third party, or is that a special service you only provide for a cash bribe? My father shot up from the sofa, his face contorted with fury. See, he shouted, pointing a shaking finger at me. She is completely paranoid. She thinks everyone is conspiring against her. Write it down, doctor. Write down that she is a danger to herself and unfit to handle her affairs. Dr. Sterling snapped his notepad shut with a loud, definitive thud. He stood up, buttoning his suit jacket, wearing a smug, victorious sneer. He had exactly what he came for, a fabricated narrative to feed the judge. There is no need to continue this evaluation, Dr. Sterling announced pompously. Maya, you exhibit classic signs of severe paranoid delusion, grandiose ideation, and complete detachment from reality. Your hostility is alarming. I will submit my official report this afternoon, strongly recommending your father be granted immediate conservatorship over your estate. My father smiled, a sickening, triumphant grin spreading across his face. He thought he had finally won. He thought he had successfully weaponized the medical establishment to lock me away and steal my wealth. I stood up slowly, smoothing the fabric of my trousers. I walked past them, moving toward the large wooden bookshelf directly across from where they sat. I picked up a small potted plant and carefully rotated it, revealing the tiny blinking red light of a high-definition recording lens perfectly angled toward the sofa. I hope you spoke clearly, doctor, I said, my voice echoing like ice in the quiet apartment, because I just live-streamed this entire fraudulent, unconsented medical evaluation to my secure cloud server. The state medical board, along with the federal authorities investigating medical malpractice and bribery, will review this crystal-clear footage tomorrow morning. Dr. Sterling went absolutely rigid. The smug arrogance melted off his face, replaced by sheer terror as his eyes locked onto the blinking red light. His hand began to tremble so violently, his grip failed entirely. The heavy leather briefcase slipped from his fingers, crashing onto the hardwood floor with a deafening thud. The sound of the briefcase hitting the floor echoed through my apartment. My father stood paralyzed, his mouth hanging open as he stared at the blinking red light on my bookshelf. Dr. Sterling did not even bother to retrieve his expensive leather bag. He scrambled backward, nearly tripping over the area rug, and bolted out of my front door as if the devil himself were chasing him. My father chased after him, shouting his name down the hallway, leaving me in total peace. Their medical ambush had failed spectacularly, which meant their only remaining option was brute legal force. 2 days later, I received a formal summons for mandatory pretrial mediation. This is standard procedure in contentious estate disputes, a final attempt to force a settlement before tying up a judge's valuable time. The location was set at one of the most elite, overwhelmingly white shoe law firms in the downtown financial district. My father and Bradley chose this specific firm to intimidate me. They wanted to drag the perceived college dropout into a towering glass skyscraper, surround her with mahogany and leather, and crush her spirit before she ever saw the inside of a courtroom. I arrived at the mediation suite precisely on time. When I pushed open the heavy double doors of the conference room, the scene was exactly as predictable as I had anticipated. Bradley sat at the head of a massive marble table, looking incredibly smug. He had brought an entire squad of intimidation. 3 corporate litigators flanked him, wearing thousands of dollars worth of custom Italian wool and staring at me with practiced predatory boredom. They clearly expected me to shuffle into the room wearing wrinkled sweatpants, accompanied by an overworked, underpaid public defender who would beg for whatever scraps they offered. Instead, I walked in entirely alone. I was wearing an immaculate, custom-tailored charcoal blazer paired with razor-sharp trousers and a pair of scarlet heels that clicked with absolute authority against the polished hardwood floor. I carried a single slim leather portfolio. I did not look like a struggling, unstable dependent. I looked like a woman who could buy the entire building and fire everyone in it. Bradley sneered, his lip curling in disgust, as I took my seat alone at the opposite end of the vast table. He leaned back, lacing his fingers together behind his head, thoroughly enjoying the audience of expensive lawyers he had brought to witness my destruction. You really are arrogant enough to show up to a corporate mediation without legal counsel, Maya Bradley scoffed, shaking his head with exaggerated pity. Your father warned us you were having delusions of grandeur, but this is just sad. You are sitting at a table with men who bill $1,000 an hour. You are completely out of your depth. We are here to end this circus so we can get your grandmother's land into capable hands. The lead attorney, a man with silver hair and a condescending smile, slid a thick bound document across the smooth marble surface. It stopped right in front of me. Maya, the attorney, began speaking in that soothing, patronizing tone men use when they think they are talking down a hysterical woman. Your family loves you. They recognize that you are unwell and incapable of managing real estate. This document is an incredibly generous settlement. You will sign over 100% of your grandmother's property to your father's holding company. In exchange, Bradley has graciously authorized a one-time payout of $10,000, plus your father will still provide the $2,000 monthly allowance. Take the money. Go get the psychiatric help you need. Do not force us to destroy you in open court. I did not touch the document. I did not even look at it. I simply kept my eyes locked on the lead attorney. The air in the room grew heavy and cold. Bradley chuckled, shifting forward in his chair to press his advantage. Did you not hear him? Maya Bradley barked, slamming his palm on the table. Take the damn deal. You have no money, you have no lawyer, and you have no leverage. You are a broke dropout who got lucky, and now the adults are taking over. Sign the paper. I slowly unclasped my leather portfolio. I did not pull out a counteroffer. I did not pull out a heartfelt letter pleading for my family to love me. I pulled out a single crisp sheet of paper. I did not hand it to Bradley. He was nothing but a loud, financially illiterate pawn. Instead, I slid the single sheet of paper directly across the marble table to the lead attorney. Bradley rolled his eyes, throwing his hands up in frustration. What is this? He groaned. Did you print out an inspirational quote? Are you giving us a doctor's note? You are wasting our billable hours with this nonsense. The lead attorney ignored Bradley. He picked up the piece of paper, adjusting his reading glasses. I watched the exact second his brain processed the corporate letterhead printed at the top of the page. I watched his eyes scan the brief, terrifyingly clear legal notice written beneath it. All the blood drained from his face in a matter of seconds. The condescending smile vanished, replaced by an expression of pure, unadulterated panic. His breathing hitched. His hands began to shake so violently that the paper rattled against his expensive wristwatch. He did not say a single word to me. He did not ask for clarification. He simply dropped the paper onto the table as if it were a live grenade. Bradley frowned, sensing the sudden catastrophic shift in the room's energy. What is it? Bradley demanded, reaching for the paper. What did the crazy girl give you? Tell her we are not accepting any counteroffers. The lead attorney did not let Bradley touch the paper. He stood up so fast his heavy leather chair tipped backward and crashed into the glass wall behind him. His two junior associates looked up in shock, completely bewildered by their boss's sudden loss of composure. The silver-haired man frantically began shoving his legal pads and gold pens into his briefcase, not caring that he was making a chaotic, unprofessional mess. He snapped the briefcase shut with a loud crack, his face completely pale and slick with a sudden layer of cold sweat. He refused to make eye contact with my brother-in-law. We are withdrawing as your counsel, Bradley, the lead attorney said, his voice trembling uncontrollably as he grabbed his coat. Effective immediately. Bradley stood paralyzed as his legal team sprinted for the elevators. He had no idea what was on that single sheet of paper, but the sheer terror radiating from his former attorneys told him everything. I picked up my portfolio, offered a chilling smile, and walked out. He was completely defenseless, but my father remained blissfully ignorant of the coming slaughter. Marcus was so confident he celebrated before ever stepping foot inside a courtroom. The night before trial, he rented the most exclusive dining room at a Black-owned luxury steakhouse downtown. Crystal chandeliers and imported champagne surrounded his sycophantic enablers. The church elders were there along with country club buddies, local politicians Chloe and a sweating Bradley. My father stood at the head of the mahogany table, holding a crystal flute of champagne. Wearing a custom tuxedo, he played the benevolent patriarch perfectly. He cleared his throat, commanding the room's attention, soaking in the admiration of his peers. To family, Marcus projected his rich baritone voice, carrying over the soft jazz. Tomorrow we secure our legacy. As many of you know, it has been a difficult journey dealing with my eldest daughter. Mental illness is a tragedy that strikes without warning. It breaks my heart to see Maya struggle, to see her reject the values of hard work and black excellence. Chloe dabbed at her eyes with a cloth napkin. But tomorrow, my father continued, we take control. We protect what my mother built. We ensure that her prime real estate is not squandered by a confused mind. We bring that property into my holding company, where it will fuel our community, our church, and our future. To the protection of our legacy. Here, the guests chanted, raising their glasses. That was the exact moment I pushed open the heavy oak doors. I stepped over the threshold with the fluid, unbothered grace of a woman who owned the ground she walked on. I wore a striking crimson slip dress that commanded absolute authority. The cheerful clinking of glasses ceased instantly. The soft murmur of conversation died in the throats of the politicians and church elders. The jazz music suddenly felt glaringly loud in the deafening silence that swallowed the room. The clinking silverware halted. The waiters carrying silver trays froze in their tracks, unsure whether to continue serving the elite clientele or retreat to the kitchen. Every head turned toward me. My father lowered his champagne flute, his self-satisfied smile freezing into a mask of pure shock. Chloe gripped the edge of the table, her knuckles turning white. Bradley simply stared at his plate, looking like he wanted the floor to open up and swallow him whole. He still had not told my father about his legal team quitting. His cowardice was palpable, radiating from his posture as he stared intensely at his untouched appetizer, praying the floor would magically open up. Maya, my father stammered, his voice dropping an octave as he desperately tried to maintain his composed facade in front of his wealthy friends. What are you doing here? This is a private event. You need to leave before you embarrass yourself further. I did not raise my voice. I did not display a single ounce of the erratic behavior he had just been preaching about. I walked slowly around the perimeter of the room, my heels clicking rhythmically against the marble floor, taking my time to look every single one of his guests directly in the eyes. I watched them shift uncomfortably in their seats, their expensive suits suddenly feeling far too tight. I stopped right behind my father's chair. I looked past him and signaled to the head maitre d', who had been hovering nervously near the entrance. The elegant man in a sharp suit rushed over immediately, carrying the leather-bound bill for the evening's extravagant feast. My father puffed his chest out again, turning to the restaurant staff. "Put it on my tab," Marcus ordered, attempting to project his usual financial dominance. "We are celebrating." I smoothly reached into my clutch and pulled out a solid, heavy metal black card. I extended it directly to the maitre d', cutting off my father entirely. "Actually, I will be covering the entire cost of the evening," I said, my voice silky and carrying a dangerous edge that echoed across the silent dining room. "Please ensure a generous 20% gratuity is added for your excellent staff. My father's credit cards are currently experiencing some operational difficulties." The maitre d' glanced at my father's pale face, recognized the undisputed authority in my tone, took the black card with a polite bow, and retreated quickly from the tension-filled room. My father stood up violently, his chair scraping loudly against the marble. His fists were clenched so tightly that his knuckles mirrored the pristine white tablecloths. "How dare you come into this establishment and disrespect me?" he hissed, leaning in close so his guests could not hear his shaking voice. "You have no money. You are playing a dangerous game, Maya. I will destroy you tomorrow. You will be begging for my mercy when the judge hands me the keys to your entire life." I did not blink. I reached back into my clutch and pulled out a thick certified legal envelope sealed with red wax. I held it in the air for a brief second, making sure Chloe and Bradley had a perfect view of it, before dropping it directly onto the center of my father's pristine gold-rimmed dinner plate. It landed with a heavy, definitive thud, right next to his perfectly cooked filet mignon. "Enjoy the steak, Dad," I said, maintaining absolute unwavering eye contact as all the color drained from his face. "It is your last one before the foreclosure on your primary dealership goes public at exactly 8 o'clock tomorrow morning." The morning sun hit the courthouse steps just as the clock struck 8. Right on schedule, my liquidation team triggered the public foreclosure of my father's flagship dealership. I could almost taste the panic radiating from the defense table as I pushed through the heavy wooden doors. Marcus, Chloe, and Bradley were already seated. My father wore a sharp navy suit, desperately projecting the image of a wealthy community patriarch. But his eyes were bloodshot and his hands trembled. The foreclosure notice had hit his inbox an hour ago, destroying his morning. Chloe sat beside him, clutching a fake designer bag she bought now that her platinum credit cards were frozen. Bradley looked like he had not slept in a week, his knee bouncing rapidly against the table. He was waiting for federal agents regarding his offshore accounts. They were a desperate trio clinging to this hearing as their ultimate salvation. They believed stealing my grandmother's commercial land would magically erase their financial ruin. They fully expected me to walk in alone again, looking defeated after last night's restaurant stunt. They expected a terrified, broken dropout ready to surrender to their demands. Instead, I walked down the center aisle, flanked by 3 of the most feared corporate litigators in the state. We moved in perfect synchronization. My legal team wore impeccable custom suits carrying leather briefcases that cost more than my father's remaining dealership inventory. I wore a tailored ivory pantsuit that commanded absolute silence in the gallery. The church elders who had shown up to witness my downfall collectively gasped at my entrance. I watched my father's jaw drop open. He blinked rapidly, staring at the 3 heavyweight attorneys pulling out chairs for me at the plaintiff's table. His new bargain bin lawyer swallowed hard, suddenly realizing he was swimming with absolute sharks. The bailiff announced the arrival of the presiding judge. She was a stern, brilliant African-American woman, known for zero tolerance toward courtroom theatrics or frivolous lawsuits. She took her seat at the elevated bench, adjusted her reading glasses, and ordered the opening statements to begin immediately. My father's attorney stood up, straightening his cheap tie. He had clearly been instructed to lean entirely into character assassination. He paced back and forth across the floor, using a somber theatrical voice designed to elicit maximum pity from the judge. "Your Honor," the lawyer began, gesturing toward me with a look of manufactured sorrow. "We are here today because a loving, devoted father is trying to save his sick, deeply troubled daughter from herself. Maya is a tragic case. 8 years ago, she suffered a complete mental collapse and dropped out of her prestigious graduate program. Since then, she has lived in absolute squalor, completely isolating herself from the loving embrace of her family and her church community. She has no verifiable employment, no stable income, and exhibits severe paranoid delusions. Yet by some unfortunate oversight, she was left in control of a historic, highly valuable piece of family property. Her father, Marcus, a pillar of the community, is simply asking the court to grant him conservatorship so he can protect this legacy before her mental incompetence destroys it forever." I sat perfectly still, my expression an unbitten mask of absolute calm. Chloe nodded along from the defense table, squeezing out a single calculated tear for the judge to see. Bradley stopped bouncing his knee momentarily, emboldened by the lawyer's vicious, degrading narrative. They truly believed that if they painted me as a stereotypical broken black woman who failed to meet strict family expectations, the judge would simply hand over my assets without a second thought. They relied on the age-old tactic of using mental health as a weapon to silence independent women who refused to fall in line. The judge took a quick note, her face completely unreadable, then nodded to my table. My lead attorney, Mr. Sterling, stood up slowly. He buttoned his jacket and walked toward the center of the room. He did not look defensive. He did not look like a man preparing to justify his client's sanity to a room full of arrogant critics. He looked like a relentless executioner ready to drop the heavy blade. Mr. Sterling bypassed the traditional wooden podium entirely. Instead, he walked over to the digital projector cart and tapped a button. A massive high-definition screen dropped down from the ceiling directly behind the witness stand. The sudden mechanical whirring sound made my father jump nervously in his expensive leather seat. "Your Honor." Mr. Sterling began, his deep voice resonating with cold, undeniable authority that instantly commanded the attention of the entire courtroom. Opposing counsel has just painted a very colorful, very fictional portrait of my remarkable client. They desperately want you to believe this hearing is merely about protecting a vulnerable woman's fragile mental health and securing a cherished family legacy from ultimate destruction. But we are absolutely not going to waste this court's valuable time defending my client's mental capacity today, because her brilliant mind is undeniably sharper than anyone else sitting inside this entire room. He confidently clicked a small wireless remote resting in his right hand. The massive white screen lit up brightly, displaying a highly complex, extensively detailed financial flowchart. Bright red lines connected various hidden shell companies, secret offshore banking accounts, and completely failing business ledgers, directly to my father's personal name. Mr. Sterling slowly turned his body to face my father directly, locking eyes with the pathetic man who had ruthlessly tormented me for decades. The silence in the grand gallery was absolutely deafening as the undeniable truth finally came to light for everyone to witness. The entire congregation stared in complete disbelief at the projector screen. "Your Honor," Mr. Sterling announced, his voice echoing perfectly across the large, tense room. "This fraudulent legal case has absolutely nothing to do with my client's mental health today. It has everything to do with Marcus's secret $15 million corporate bankruptcy." The gasps in the courtroom were immediate and deafening. My father gripped the edge of his table so hard his knuckles turned a ghostly white. The judge banged her gavel twice, demanding order. Her eyes locked onto the towering financial chart Mr. Sterling had just projected onto the screen. Opposing counsel leaped up desperately, objecting to the evidence, but the judge quickly overruled him. She leaned back in her high leather chair and instructed my father's attorney to call his first witness. They had no choice but to put my father on the stand. He had to testify. He had to try and salvage his crumbling narrative before the judge dismissed his entire case. Marcus walked up to the witness stand with the slow, deliberate pace of a seasoned performer. He placed his hand on the Bible, swore to tell the truth, and took his seat. He adjusted his expensive, tailored suit, making sure he looked every bit the distinguished community leader. He looked at the judge with a masterfully crafted expression of deep paternal sorrow. He was ready to play the heartbroken patriarch forced to make the ultimate sacrifice for his sick little girl. Under the gentle questioning of his own cheap lawyer, my father launched into a heavily rehearsed monologue. He spoke softly, letting his voice crack at perfectly timed intervals. He told the court how it broke his heart to see me abandon my education. He claimed he had spent the last 8 years desperately trying to pull me out of a dark, depressive spiral. He described my modest apartment as a squalid trap, painting a picture of a woman completely incapable of functioning in society. He pulled a pristine handkerchief from his pocket and dabbed at his dry eyes, swearing that he only wanted conservatorship to protect my well-being and preserve my grandmother's sacred legacy. I sat perfectly still, my face a mask of stone. I glanced over at the gallery. Chloe was nodding along, pressing a tissue to her face, playing the devastated sister to absolute perfection. Beside her sat Bradley. My brother-in-law leaned back in his wooden bench, his arms crossed confidently over his chest. He flashed a smug, triumphant smirk in my direction. He actually believed my father was winning. He believed that white-collar privilege and a few fake tears would be enough to manipulate an experienced judge. The defense attorney finished his questioning and proudly sat down. The judge turned her sharp gaze to my table. Mr. Sterling stood up slowly, buttoning his jacket. He walked toward the center of the room, holding nothing but a single thin manila folder. He did not look angry. He looked completely bored, which was infinitely more terrifying. Mr. Sterling stopped a few feet from the witness box. "Marcus," he began, his voice echoing clearly across the silent courtroom. "In your sworn affidavit submitted under penalty of perjury to this very court, you stated that you have been the sole financial provider for your daughter Maya for the past 8 years. You claimed you paid her rent, bought her groceries, and funded her medical treatments out of the goodness of your own heart. Is that correct?" My father lifted his chin, projecting unwavering confidence. "Yes, that is correct," he answered smoothly. "I have sacrificed everything to keep a roof over her head. I have poured my own resources into keeping her safe because she simply cannot provide for herself." Mr. Sterling nodded slowly, as if he were deeply moved by the testimony. He opened his manila folder and pulled out a stack of papers. He walked over and handed a copy to the judge, then handed the original stack directly to my father. "That is a fascinating testament to your fatherly devotion, Marcus," Mr. Sterling said, pacing back toward our table. "However, the documents you are holding are certified financial records spanning the last 10 full years. We subpoenaed every single bank account registered to your name, your businesses, and your various shell companies. We also subpoenaed the payment records from Maya's property management company and her utility providers." My father looked down at the papers. His confident posture began to physically deflate. He swallowed hard, his eyes darting frantically across the black and white text. Mr. Sterling raised his voice, ensuring the entire gallery heard every single word. "Marcus, can you point out exactly where on those statements you paid for your daughter's rent? Because according to these certified bank records, you have not transferred a single dime to Maya in a decade. You have not paid for a single grocery bill. You have not paid for a single medical expense. In fact, these records prove that the only financial relationship you have with Maya is a long history of you trying to claim her as a dependent on your taxes long after she became an independent adult." The courtroom began to murmur. The church elders sitting in the back rows shifted uncomfortably, whispering to one another. The judge flipped through her copy of the bank statements, her expression hardening into a mask of pure judicial fury. My father gripped the microphone, stammering defensively. "I gave her cash," he lied, his voice rising in panic. "I gave her envelopes of cash so she could maintain her dignity. You cannot track cash." Mr. Sterling smiled. It was a cold, predatory smile. "You are absolutely right, Marcus. Tracking cash is incredibly difficult. Tracking massive electronic wire transfers, however, is exceptionally easy." Mr. Sterling turned and walked back to his briefcase. He pulled out a heavy, thick binder sealed with a bright red evidence sticker. He broke the seal with a loud, definitive rip that echoed like a gunshot in the tense room. He walked right up to the witness stand and dropped the heavy ledger onto the wooden ledge directly in front of my father. My father stared at the binder as if it were a venomous snake. His chest heaved. Sweat began to bead on his forehead, ruining his perfectly polished appearance. Over in the gallery, the smug grin had completely vanished from Bradley's face. Mr. Sterling leaned in close, tapping his finger against the cover of the heavy ledger. "We know you did not give Maya any cash, Marcus," Mr. Sterling stated clearly, "because your company payroll accounts are completely drained. So, Marcus, can you explain to the court why you illegally transferred $500,000 from your company payroll into Bradley's personal offshore account last Tuesday?" In the gallery, Bradley violently choked on his water, coughing uncontrollably as the entire courtroom turned to stare at him. The hacking sounds echoing from the gallery shattered whatever miserable defense my father had left. Bradley was clutching his chest, his face turning a dangerous shade of purple as he sputtered and gasped for air. He knocked over his heavy wooden chair in his frantic attempt to stand up, desperate to escape the laser-focused stares of every single person in the room. The bailiff took a step forward, his hand resting on his utility belt, but the judge simply banged her gavel with a sharp, resounding crack that brought the room back to absolute order. Marcus sat frozen in the witness box. His mouth hung open, but no words came out. He looked like a deflated balloon, his entire empire of lies and financial fraud laid bare on the massive projector screen for his church congregation and community to see. He had no explanation for the offshore transfer. He had no explanation for his bankruptcy. He was a ruined man. Mr. Sterling did not even wait for an answer. He simply turned his back on my father and walked to his seat. "No further questions for this witness, Your Honor," Mr. Sterling announced, his tone dripping with absolute dismissal. The judge instructed my father to step down. Marcus practically stumbled out of the witness box, his legs shaking so badly he had to grip the wooden railing to keep from collapsing. He slunk back to the defense table, a hollow shell of the arrogant patriarch who had tried to lock me in a psychiatric ward just a few days prior. His cheap lawyer was sweating profusely, hurriedly shuffling through his disorganized legal pads in a frantic attempt to salvage their completely derailed case. The lawyer cleared his throat, his voice cracking slightly under the intense pressure of the courtroom. "Your Honor, the defense calls Chloe to the stand," the lawyer declared, motioning for my younger sister to come forward. Chloe stood up, smoothing the front of her modest beige designer dress. She had clearly dressed for the part of the grieving, concerned sister. She walked to the witness box with her head bowed, practicing a look of profound sorrow that she had undoubtedly rehearsed in the mirror for hours. She placed her hand on the Bible, swore to tell the truth, and sat down delicately. Her lawyer approached the stand, giving her a sympathetic nod. "Chloe," he began softly, "could you please describe your sister's behavior over the past few weeks? Specifically, could you tell the court what happened last Tuesday afternoon at your home?" Chloe took a deep, shuddering breath. She looked directly at the judge, her eyes shimmering with perfectly timed fake tears. "It has been a nightmare, Your Honor!" Chloe cried, her voice trembling with manufactured fear. "Maya has become completely detached from reality. Last Tuesday, right around 2 in the afternoon, she showed up uninvited at my house. She was completely erratic. She started screaming at me, throwing my patio furniture into the pool and demanding money. She was violent, Your Honor. She grabbed me by the shoulders and threatened to hurt me if I did not convince our father to drop this conservatorship. I was terrified for my life. She is a danger to herself and to everyone around her. She needs to be locked away before she kills someone." A collective gasp swept through the gallery. Chloe buried her face in her hands, letting out a loud theatrical sob. It was a masterful performance. She painted me as a violent, unhinged black woman, leaning into every ugly stereotype she thought would secure a victory. She expected the judge to take pity on her. She expected me to lose my temper and validate her lies. I simply crossed my legs and smiled at Mr. Sterling. The defense lawyer thanked Chloe and returned to his seat, looking somewhat relieved. He thought they had finally scored a point. He thought they had firmly established my violent incompetence. Mr. Sterling stood up. He did not bring a single piece of paper with him. He walked to the center of the room and looked at my sister with an expression of pure, unadulterated boredom. "Chloe," Mr. Sterling said, his voice calm and lethal, "you are testifying under oath that my client Maya violently attacked you at your suburban home last Tuesday at exactly 2 in the afternoon. Is that your sworn testimony?" Chloe lifted her chin, projecting absolute defiance. "Yes, it is. I will never forget it. It was the most traumatizing day of my life." Mr. Sterling did not argue. He did not raise his voice. He simply turned to the court clerk and signaled toward the projector. "Your Honor," Mr. Sterling said, keeping his eyes locked on Chloe, "the defense has submitted a fascinating narrative. However, we would like to submit Exhibit D into evidence. This is time-stamped high-definition security footage retrieved directly from the primary lobby cameras of the Azure luxury high-rise in Miami, Florida." The massive screen behind the witness box flickered to life. The video displayed a breathtaking sunlit lobby of an ultra-exclusive residential building. In the bottom right corner of the screen, the timestamp glared in bright white numbers, clearly displaying last Tuesday at exactly 2 in the afternoon. The courtroom held its collective breath as the footage played. Right in the center of the frame stood Chloe. She was not cowering in fear at her suburban home. She was wearing a bright yellow bikini, a sheer cover-up, and oversized sunglasses, throwing an absolute temper tantrum at the Miami concierge desk. The audio kicked in, echoing loudly across the courtroom. "What do you mean my card is declined?" Chloe's voice shrieked through the courtroom speakers. "Run it again. I demand access to the rooftop spa. Do you know who I am?" The entire gallery watched in stunned silence as the concierge politely informed Chloe that her platinum card was frozen and she would need to vacate the premises. Mr. Sterling paused the video right on a crystal-clear high-definition close-up of Chloe's furious face. He turned back to the witness box. Chloe's jaw had dropped so low it practically touched her chest. The fake tears were gone, replaced by absolute blinding terror. "Chloe," Mr. Sterling asked, his voice dripping with venomous sarcasm, "unless you have discovered the secret to human teleportation, it is geographically impossible for you to have been violently attacked by my client in your home last Tuesday. You were over 1,000 miles away, attempting to scam a free spa treatment at a luxury high-rise in Miami." He paused, letting the devastating reality sink in. "And for the record, Your Honor," Mr. Sterling added smoothly, "my client Maya is the sole owner and primary landlord of that exact Miami high-rise building." She authorized her security team to pull this footage the moment Chloe's frozen credit card flagged the system. The courtroom erupted into absolute chaos. The church elders were shaking their heads in disgust. My father buried his face in his hands, realizing his golden child had just walked directly into a catastrophic trap. The defense attorney was completely frozen, his eyes wide with horror as he realized his client had just committed blatant documented perjury on the stand. The judge slammed her gavel down with such ferocity that the wooden handle echoed like a gunshot. The room fell into dead silence immediately. The judge, a strict, no-nonsense, African-American woman who had zero tolerance for liars in her courtroom, slowly took off her reading glasses. She folded her hands on top of her heavy wooden desk and leaned far over the bench. Her dark eyes glared down at Chloe with a terrifying, righteous fury. "Perjury is a felony in this state, young lady," the judge stated, her voice dangerously quiet and commanding. "Do you want—" Chloe looked at the judge, looked at the undeniable footage of herself on the giant screen, and completely broke. She opened her mouth, but no words came out. The pristine, arrogant, golden child facade shattered into dust. Chloe buried her face in her hands and burst into real, uncontrollable, hyperventilating tears. The loud, pathetic echo of Chloe weeping uncontrollably filled the tense courtroom. She could barely breathe, mascara running down her face as she scrambled out of the witness box in absolute disgrace. Her lawyer practically shoved her back toward the defense table, desperate to distance his own career from her radioactive perjury. My father looked physically sick, his head buried deep in his hands, realizing his golden child had just ruined their entire strategy. But Bradley remained completely delusional. He stood up, adjusting his custom-tailored suit jacket, shooting me a glare of absolute contempt. He still believed he was the smartest person in the room. The defense lawyer, sweating entirely through his cheap dress shirt, called Bradley to the stand. Bradley walked up to the box with a swagger that screamed unearned confidence. He took the solemn oath with a highly visible smirk, sitting down heavily and casually crossing one ankle over his knee. He was a white corporate finance broker who had married into a wealthy black family, and he constantly weaponized his presence to assert dominance. He truly thought his skin color and his Wall Street vocabulary would instantly charm the strict judge. He smiled at her openly, offering a practiced, extremely condescending nod. The desperate defense attorney asked him to evaluate my financial competency regarding my grandmother's sprawling estate. Bradley chuckled loudly, leaning straight into the microphone. "Your Honor." Bradley began using a smooth, authoritative tone designed to sound entirely reasonable. "As a senior financial broker, I manage high-yield portfolios for elite corporate clients. I understand the intense complexities of commercial real estate. What Maya inherited is not a blessing. It is a catastrophic, monumental financial liability. The land is essentially a toxic asset. It sits in an underdeveloped industrial zone that has seen zero economic growth in decades. It is a dumping ground overrun with weeds, broken concrete, and squatters. Maya is a college dropout who lives in a tiny apartment. She lacks the capital, the credit, and the basic financial literacy to develop or even maintain this kind of property. She is letting it rot because she simply does not understand carrying costs, environmental liabilities, or property taxes. If she retains ownership, the city will absolutely seize it within 2 years for unpaid municipal taxes. My father-in-law and I are stepping in to absorb this massive financial burden out of pure love. We want to liquidate it before Maya bankrupts herself entirely." Bradley leaned back in his wooden chair, looking extremely satisfied with his performance. He painted himself as the benevolent savior, the highly intelligent financial expert, rescuing the helpless, incompetent black woman from her own tragic ignorance. I sat at the plaintiff table without moving a single muscle. I watched him dig his own grave with every arrogant syllable. The judge stared at him, entirely unamused by his performance. She did not nod. She did not smile back. Mr. Sterling stood up from my table. He did not bring any massive financial ledgers this time. He held a single stiff piece of high-quality parchment paper bearing an official gold seal from the City Planning Commission. He walked very slowly toward the witness stand. Bradley smirked, completely unafraid of the approaching attorney. He actually believed his testimony was bulletproof. Mr. Sterling stopped right in front of the witness box. Bradley, you just testified under oath that my client is harboring a toxic asset in an underdeveloped industrial zone, Mr. Sterling said, clearly his voice carrying a dangerous edge. You claim she lacks the financial literacy to understand its value. Is that your expert, highly professional assessment? Bradley nodded his head confidently. Yes, absolutely. It is a completely worthless plot of dirt. Mr. Sterling handed the gold-sealed document directly to Bradley. Then he turned to face the judge. Your Honor, I would like to submit this certified city zoning and appraisal document into official evidence. It was finalized and approved by the mayor's office exactly 90 days ago. Mr. Sterling turned back to my brother-in-law. Bradley, since you are the esteemed financial expert in the room, please read the highlighted section of that official city document out loud for the court to hear today. Bradley rolled his eyes, picking up the paper with a dramatic, heavy sigh. He acted as though he was humoring a ridiculous, desperate request from a losing legal team. He scanned the top of the page, his eyes moving lazily over the official government letterhead. But as his gaze reached the highlighted paragraph, his entire body went rigidly stiff. The arrogant smirk vanished instantly from his face. His breathing stopped completely. The color drained from his cheeks so fast he looked physically ill. His hands began to shake, causing the thick parchment paper to rattle loudly in the dead silence of the courtroom. Read it. Bradley, Mr. Sterling commanded, his voice cracking like a heavy whip. Bradley swallowed hard. He opened his mouth, but his throat was completely dry. He tried to speak, but only a pathetic, raspy squeak came out. Read the official zoning appraisal out loud, Mr. Sterling demanded again, stepping much closer to the wooden box. Do not make the judge hold you in contempt. Bradley gripped the paper with white knuckles. He looked frantically at my father, who was staring right back at him in absolute terror. Bradley looked back down at the document, his voice shaking violently as he forced the words out of his mouth. The property is zoned for a $200 million commercial tech hub. Bradley read, his voice completely breaking on the final word. He dropped the expensive piece of paper directly onto the cold courtroom floor, totally speechless. He suddenly realized Maya did not inherit dirt. She inherited the most valuable commercial plot in the entire city. His privileged, condescending illusion was utterly destroyed, leaving him sitting there as a completely exposed, fraudulent fool in front of the entire assembly of shocked onlookers. The heavy parchment paper hit the courtroom floor with a soft, pathetic thud. Bradley slumped back in the witness chair, his shoulders completely caved in. He stared blankly at the wood paneling, stripped of every ounce of his unearned arrogance. The magnificent $200 million reality of my grandmother's estate hung in the air, suffocating the defense table. Instead, he had just publicly confirmed that my family was trying to steal a monumental fortune right out from under me. The defense attorney did not even try to ask a follow-up question. He practically sprinted back to his seat, burying his face in his hands. He knew his legal career was hanging by a thread. The judge ordered Bradley to step down. He shuffled off the stand, avoiding eye contact with everyone, and slumped into his chair next to my sister. Chloe was still wiping her smeared makeup, her chest heaving with silent, terrified sobs. But my father could not accept defeat. Marcus had spent his entire life crafting an immaculate image of black excellence. He was the wealthy dealership owner, the respected church leader. To sit there and watch his empire crumble, to watch his golden child and his prized son-in-law fail, so spectacularly broke something deep inside his narcissistic brain. He could not handle the humiliation of losing to the daughter he had spent a decade treating like absolute garbage. Without waiting for his lawyer to object or request a recess, my father leaped out of his chair. He ignored court decorum entirely, his face twisted into a mask of pure, unadulterated rage. He marched straight back to the witness stand. The bailiff stepped forward, his hand resting on his belt, but the judge raised a single finger, signaling him to hold back. She wanted to see exactly what my father was about to do. Marcus slammed his hands down on the wooden railing of the witness box. He glared at Mr. Sterling, breathing heavily, his custom suit clinging to his sweat-soaked back. "You think you are so smart?" My father growled, his deep voice shaking with uncontrollable anger. "You think bringing in a piece of paper changes anything? It changes absolutely nothing. That land is worth $200 million. That proves my exact point. Do you honestly believe a girl who lives in a cheap apartment can handle a $200 million tech hub? She cannot even handle her own life. She is going to lose everything to the state, and she will drag my mother's sacred legacy right down into the gutter with her. I am the only one with the business acumen to manage that property. I am the patriarch of this family. It belongs to me. Mr. Sterling did not argue. He simply stood at our table perfectly relaxed, allowing my father to dig a hole so deep he would never climb out. Your business acumen resulted in a secret $15 million bankruptcy, Mr. Sterling reminded him calmly. The rational part of my father's brain snapped entirely. The perfectly manicured image he had projected for 60 years evaporated in a split second. He lost his temper in a way I had not seen since the night he kicked me out of his house for dropping out of my graduate program. The public humiliation of his exposed fraud and the absolute destruction of his carefully curated community standing pushed him completely over the edge. He leaned entirely out of the witness box, his eyes bulging, spittle flying from his lips as he pointed a shaking, violent finger directly at my face. "She is an embarrassment!" My father screamed, his voice echoing violently off the high ceilings of the courtroom. "She is a dropout. She has nothing. She is nothing, and she does not deserve that land. She is completely incompetent." I was panting heavily, his chest heaving as the vicious, hateful words hung in the air. He had finally shown his true colors to the entire world. He did not care about my mental health. He did not care about saving his sick little girl. He only cared about power greed and punishing me for refusing to submit to his toxic control. The entire courtroom fell dead silent at the outburst. The church elders sitting in the gallery gasped, utterly horrified by the sheer venom spewing from a man who claimed to lead their congregation with Christian love. Even Chloe stopped crying, staring at our father in stunned disbelief. The defense attorney sank lower in his chair, wishing he could become invisible. The silence was heavy, thick with the undeniable reality of my father's absolute cruelty. I did not flinch. I did not shed a single tear. I did not look away or shrink under his hateful gaze. I sat perfectly upright, my hands resting calmly on the table, wearing a serene, victorious smile. I let him scream. I let him show the judge exactly what kind of monster I had survived. I slowly shifted my gaze from my father's sweating, enraged face up to the elevated bench. The judge had seen enough. She sat back in her large leather chair, her expression carved from solid stone. She looked at my father with a mixture of profound disgust and absolute unwavering authority. Slowly, deliberately, the judge reached up and took off her reading glasses, folding them with a soft click. She set them down on her heavy wooden desk. Then she reached to her right and picked up a thick, sealed black folder. She held the black folder in her hands. The judge leaned far forward over the bench, resting her elbows on the wood. She stared a hole straight through my father. His heavy panting slowed. The violent pointing finger slowly dropped to his side as a new wave of pure dread washed over his face. He suddenly realized he had just screamed at the wrong woman in the wrong courtroom. The ultimate reckoning was finally here. The absolute silence in the courtroom was suffocating. Nobody dared to breathe. But Marcus stood frozen, his chest rising and falling as the sheer intensity of the judge locked him into place. The Honorable Justice Harrison simply looked at my father with the deep, tired disdain of a black woman who had spent decades watching arrogant men try to weaponize the legal system. "You call her an embarrassment?" Marcus, the judge, asked, her voice dangerously quiet, but carrying clearly to the very back row of the gallery. "You stand in my courtroom, having just been exposed for a massive secret bankruptcy and illegal offshore transfers, and you have the audacity to point your finger at this young woman and call her incompetent." My father swallowed hard. The thick knot in his throat bobbed visibly. He opened his mouth to defend his toxic outburst, but the judge raised her hand, instantly silencing him. "But your particular brand of arrogance is truly astounding. You filed this conservatorship petition claiming your daughter is an unstable, destitute college dropout who cannot manage a checking account. You brought a disgraced, bribed psychiatrist to her home to fabricate a medical crisis." My father gripped the wooden railing of the witness box. "Your Honor." He stammered, his voice weak and completely devoid of its usual booming pastoral resonance. "She is unwell. You must look at her living conditions. She has nothing. She needs my guidance." The judge let out a short, humorless laugh. She picked up the thick, sealed black folder my lead attorney, Mr. Sterling, had submitted at the very beginning of the trial. She unclasped the binding and opened it on her desk. "You really do not know who she is, do you?" the judge asked her, dark eyes piercing straight through his collapsing facade. My father blinked very rapidly, his brow furrowed in genuine confusion. He looked over at me, then back to the judge. "She is my daughter," he muttered defensively. "I know exactly who she is. She is a girl who threw away her future and has been hiding in a cheap apartment for 8 years." The defense attorney sitting at the opposing table suddenly stopped shuffling his legal pads. He stared at the black folder in the judge's hands. As an experienced corporate lawyer, he recognized the distinct watermarked seal of a federal financial disclosure form. The color completely drained from his face as he realized what was about to happen. "Let me enlighten you," Marcus, the judge, stated firmly. "This court required your daughter's legal team to submit a full verified declaration of assets to counter your claims of her financial insolvency. I am holding a certified corporate disclosure filed with the federal government and verified by 3 separate banking institutions." The judge adjusted the document, ensuring her voice carried perfect clarity across the silent room. "According to these official federal filings," the judge read aloud, "Maya is the sole founder, chief executive officer, and majority shareholder of ME Holdings." The words hit the defense table like a physical explosion. My father's cheap lawyer physically recoiled in his leather chair. He threw his hands up and pushed himself entirely away from the table, staring at me with absolute, unfiltered terror. In the corporate finance world, ME Holdings was a ruthless, legendary venture capital and debt acquisition firm known for swallowing failing businesses whole. And the lawyer just realized he had spent the last 2 days trying to bully the billionaire owner of that exact firm into giving up a $200 million plot of land for a pathetic monthly allowance. My father stood in the witness box, shaking his head slowly. "No," he whispered, his voice trembling as denial fought against the crushing reality. "No, that is impossible. That is a lie. She dropped out of school. She has no money. She cannot possibly own a holding company." In the gallery, the church elders began whispering frantically among themselves. Chloe let out a sharp, panicked gasp, her manicured hands flying up to cover her mouth as she stared at me in total horror. Bradley, who was already suffocating under the weight of his own exposed offshore fraud, went completely rigid. He knew the name ME Holdings. Every single finance broker in the city knew that terrifying name. It was the apex predator of their cutthroat industry, a massive, shadowy corporate entity that bought up toxic debt and liquidated corrupt companies without a single shred of mercy. The color left his face as the devastating truth clicked into place in his mind. "It is highly certified," Marcus, the judge, corrected, sharply tapping the official document. "Your daughter did not just drop out and hide. She built a financial empire completely under the radar, while you were too busy protecting your fragile ego to notice her brilliance. She used that cheap apartment as a decoy, so vultures exactly like you would leave her alone while she accumulated generational wealth." My father grabbed his chest. His breathing became rapid and shallow. The pristine image of black excellence he had used to control our family for decades was entirely obliterated by the daughter he had declared worthless. He looked at me, his eyes wide with a horrifying realization that he was standing in the presence of an absolute giant he could never manipulate, intimidate, or control. But the judge was not finished destroying him. She slowly turned the page of the corporate disclosure, her expression turning downright lethal as she prepared to deliver the final crushing blow to his shattered ego. "Marcus, you should probably sit down for this next part," the judge instructed coldly. "Because ME Holdings is not just a highly successful venture capital firm. According to this certified transfer of assets, ME Holdings is the exact venture capital firm that acquired the $40 million debt on your car dealerships yesterday. She is not a ward of the state, Marcus. She is your largest creditor." The shockwave of the judge's declaration hit the courtroom gallery with the force of a physical blow. The absolute silence that had gripped the room instantly shattered into a chaotic symphony of gasps, furious whispers, and frantic shuffling. The church elders who had come to witness my destruction were now staring at my father as if he were a ghost. But my eyes bypassed my ruined father completely. My gaze locked directly onto the gallery bench where my arrogant white brother-in-law sat. Bradley had finally stopped smirking. The color drained from his face so rapidly that his skin took on a sickly, translucent hue. The name rang in his head like a funeral bell. M.E. Holdings. It was not just a random corporate entity to him. In the cutthroat financial district where Bradley operated, that name commanded absolute terror. His breathing grew shallow and erratic. His hands, which had been confidently draped over the wooden pew just moments ago, began to tremble uncontrollably. He frantically reached into the inside pocket of his expensive Italian wool suit and pulled out his smartphone. He had silenced it for the hearing, assuming this morning would be a quick, effortless victory lap. I watched the bright glow of his screen reflect in his panicked eyes. He tapped the display and his entire body went rigid. I knew exactly what he was looking at, because I was the one who orchestrated the timeline. He had over 40 missed calls. His screen was absolutely flooded with urgent, desperate text messages from his senior partners, the head of corporate compliance, and his firm's emergency legal counsel. "Bradley, where the hell are you?" Read one message flashing across his lock screen. "The SEC just raided the downtown office. We are completely locked out of the trading floors. Call me immediately." Another message followed right behind it. M.E. Holdings just filed a massive federal lawsuit against the entire brokerage. They have the offshore transaction ledgers. We are ruined. Bradley stared at his phone, his chest heaving as the catastrophic reality crushed the breath out of his lungs. The $500,000 transfer he had illegally accepted from my father was not just a dirty family secret. It was the linchpin evidence in a highly coordinated career-ending securities fraud lawsuit that my holding company had filed in federal court at exactly 8 o'clock this morning. I had not just baited the Securities and Exchange Commission with an anonymous tip. I had handed them a fully verified airtight financial dossier, proving Bradley and his partners were laundering illicit funds through offshore shell companies. He looked up from his phone, his terrified eyes meeting mine across the chaotic courtroom. I offered him a slow, perfectly serene smile. The sheer realization that the black woman he had repeatedly mansplained, insulted, and tried to strip of her basic human rights was the exact architect of his absolute destruction completely broke his mind. The arrogant finance broker who thought his privilege made him invincible was now staring at the billionaire CEO who held his entire future in the palm of her hand. Chloe, sitting right next to him, noticed his catastrophic meltdown. She grabbed his arm, her fake designer handbag sliding off her lap onto the floor. "Bradley, what is wrong?" she hissed, her voice shrill with rising panic. "What is happening? Tell me what is going on with Dad." Bradley did not even look at his wife. The illusion of their perfect, affluent marriage dissolved in a split second of pure survival instinct. He violently yanked his arm out of her grasp, nearly knocking her backward into the wooden pew. He did not care about her frozen credit cards. He did not care about my father's bankruptcy. He only cared about saving himself from the incoming federal indictment. "I need to leave," Bradley muttered frantically, his voice cracking as he stumbled to his feet. "I have to get out of here right now." He did not wait for the judge to dismiss the court. He did not say a word to the defense attorney who was currently wiping sweat from his forehead at the front table. Bradley simply abandoned his entire new family. He turned his back on the courtroom proceedings, shoved past a stunned church elder, and began practically sprinting up the center aisle toward the main exit. The judge noticed the sudden commotion in the gallery. She raised her gavel, her sharp eyes tracking his desperate retreat. "Excuse me," the judge commanded, her voice cutting through the noise. "We are not adjourned. Return to your seat immediately." Bradley ignored a direct order from a sitting judge. His panic had completely overridden his sense of self-preservation. He kept his head down, clutching his buzzing cell phone like a lifeline, desperate to escape the suffocating walls of the courtroom and reach the safety of the street. He thought he could outrun the consequences of his actions. He thought he could call his wealthy connections, hire a high-priced defense team, and somehow spin his way out of the massive fraud charges. He reached the back of the courtroom, his breathing ragged and desperate. He threw his weight against the heavy wooden double doors, pushing them wide open with a loud, echoing crash. He intended to slip quietly into the hallway and vanish before anyone could stop him. But I had meticulously planned every single second of this morning. As the heavy oak doors swung open, Bradley's frantic momentum came to an abrupt, violent halt. He slammed right into a solid wall of dark blue windbreakers. He stumbled backward, dropping his smartphone onto the polished marble floor. Standing perfectly still in the doorframe, completely blocking his only route of escape, were two tall, unsmiling federal agents. The gold letters FBI were printed boldly across their jackets. The agent on the left did not say a single word. He simply reached into his pocket and pulled out a badge. The federal agent held up his badge, the silver shield glinting under the harsh fluorescent lights of the courtroom. Bradley froze completely, his eyes darting frantically, looking for a way out. There was none. The second agent grabbed Bradley by the shoulder, spun him around, and slammed his chest against the heavy oak door. The distinct metallic clicking sound of handcuffs locking around his wrists echoed all the way down the center aisle. Bradley let out a pathetic, high-pitched whine as they read him his rights regarding wire fraud and federal embezzlement. The arrogant finance broker who had swaggered into the room expecting to steal my fortune was now being frog-marched out in federal custody. Chaos erupted in the gallery. The church elders were standing up, shouting and pointing. Chloe shrieked, watching her husband get dragged away. But Judge Harrison was not finished. She slammed her heavy wooden gavel down 3 consecutive times, the explosive cracks instantly silencing the panicked crowd. "Order in my court," Judge Harrison demanded, her voice cutting through the remaining whispers. "Everyone will sit down and remain completely silent, or I will have the bailiffs clear this entire room." The congregation scrambled back into their seats. Chloe sank into the wooden pew, trembling uncontrollably. Judge Harrison turned her furious gaze back down to my father. Marcus sat slumped at the defense table. His cheap lawyer was physically pushing his chair away from him, desperately trying to distance himself from the radioactive fallout. Marcus, the judge, stated, her tone cold and final. "You came into this courtroom attempting to weaponize the legal system against an independent, highly successful black woman. You fabricated evidence, committed perjury, and attempted to steal assets that legally belong to the chief executive officer of ME Holdings. Your actions are not just a moral failure, they represent a coordinated, malicious fraud." My father opened his mouth to speak, but his voice failed completely. He just shook his head, his hands trembling violently on the table. Therefore, Judge Harrison continued reading from her official ledger. "I am dismissing this petition for conservatorship with prejudice. You are permanently barred from ever bringing this matter before a court again. But we are absolutely not finished here today." The defense attorney visibly swallowed, wiping a steady stream of sweat from his forehead. "I am formally ordering a full, comprehensive investigation into your legal counsel regarding the submission of fraudulent court documents," the judge announced, glaring directly at the sweating lawyer. "Furthermore, I am forwarding the entire transcript of today's proceedings, along with the digital evidence submitted by the plaintiff, to the district attorney. We will be launching an immediate criminal investigation into your hired medical professional, Dr. Sterling, for bribery, falsifying medical records, and attempted medical fraud." The defense attorney dropped his head onto the table. His career was over. My father clutched his chest, his breathing ragged. The empire he had spent 60 years building had vaporized in 30 minutes. He lost his flagship dealership. He lost his community standing. His son-in-law was in federal custody. His golden child daughter committed documented perjury. He was now facing severe criminal investigations that would land him in a federal penitentiary. "This court is adjourned," Judge Harrison declared, bringing the gavel down one final time. The sharp crack of the wood signaled the absolute end of Marcus's reign. The judge stood up, gathered her files, and exited the bench without giving my father a second glance. The bailiffs moved into the aisles, directing the shocked, whispering church elders toward the exit. They looked at my father with pure disgust as they filed out. The man they had worshipped as a spiritual and financial leader was nothing but a manipulative con artist who had just been dismantled by the very daughter he tried to discard. I did not rush. I took my time. I stood up slowly and methodically, buttoned my custom ivory blazer. Mr. Sterling and the rest of my corporate legal team packed their briefcases with quiet, practiced efficiency. They gave me respectful, approving nods. The trap had worked flawlessly. I turned away from the plaintiff table and stepped into the center aisle. I did not look back. I walked with my head held high, my heels clicking rhythmically against the floor. As I passed the defense table, I could hear my father hyperventilating. His chest heaved as he stared blankly at the floor. He was completely shattered. He did not yell. He did not hurl insults. He had absolutely nothing left to say. The terrifying, abusive patriarch who had haunted my entire life was completely gone. In his place sat a broken, bankrupt old man waiting for his inevitable arrest. I walked past him without breaking my stride. I moved through the heavy double doors, leaving the suffocating atmosphere of the courtroom behind me. I stepped out into the brightly lit, expansive marble hallway. The air felt fresh. The heavy chains of my family's expectations, their constant belittling, and their toxic manipulation had been severed. I had won. My grandmother's legacy was safe. I took a deep breath, ready to head to my waiting car, when the courtroom doors burst open behind me. Rapid, desperate footsteps slapped against the marble floor. I stopped and turned around slowly. Chloe was sprinting down the hallway toward me. Her beige designer dress was wrinkled. Her expensive heels echoed chaotically. Her face was a complete disaster of running mascara and splotchy red skin. She was sobbing hysterically, completely ignoring the collapse of our father sitting just a few feet away inside the courtroom. She closed the distance between us, lunging forward with a pathetic lack of dignity. She desperately grabbed my forearm, her manicured fingers digging into the pristine fabric of my blazer. "Maya, please," Chloe wailed, her voice cracking as tears poured down her ruined face. "Please, you have to stop this. We are sisters. You cannot let them take Bradley away." I stopped walking. The heavy doors swung shut, muting the chaos inside. Chloe sobbed hysterically, her fingers digging desperately into the crisp ivory fabric of my blazer. Her designer dress was wrinkled, her makeup smeared across her cheeks in ugly streaks. The golden child, the perfect suburban wife, had completely unraveled right there in the expansive marble hallway. I lowered my gaze to her trembling hand. I did not yell. I did not show an ounce of the frantic emotion consuming her. I calmly raised my hand and firmly brushed her fingers off my sleeve, smoothing out the tiny crease she had left behind. "You tried to lock me in a psychiatric ward to steal from me, Chloe," I said, my voice echoing like ice against the marble walls. "Do not touch your husband's biggest creditor." Chloe gasped, stumbling backward. "But we are blood," she wailed, wrapping arms around her waist. "You have the money. You have power to stop the agents. You can drop the lawsuit." "Bradley was just stressed about finances. He did not mean to hurt you. If he goes to federal prison, I lose everything. The penthouse, the cars, my entire life is over." I stared at her, feeling nothing but cold detachment. "You lost everything the second you decided to commit perjury under oath," I replied smoothly. "You sat in that witness box, looked a federal judge in the eye, and swore I was a violent, unhinged threat to society. You tried to legally strip away my human rights to pay off your secret credit cards. Bradley is going to prison because he is a federal criminal who stole offshore funds. You are going to lose your penthouse because you built a life entirely on fraud. That is not my doing, Chloe. That is just gravity catching up to your choices." Before Chloe could launch into another excuse, the heavy doors groaned open. My father stumbled into the bright hallway. The transformation was shocking. 2 days ago, he had been the arrogant patriarch lecturing the entire church community about Black excellence and demanding absolute obedience. Now Marcus looked like a hollow, broken shell of a man. His expensive custom suit hung loosely on his frame. His tie was loosened and a thick layer of sweat coated his ashen face. He breathed heavily, clutching his chest as he took unsteady steps toward me. "Maya," my father rasped, his voice devoid of all its former booming authority. "Maya, please wait. We need to talk." I turned to face him, my posture impeccably straight. I signaled for my legal team to give us a moment. Mr. Sterling remained standing a few feet away, watching my father with the vigilance of a hawk. "There is nothing left to talk about, Marcus," I stated firmly. "The judge dismissed your fraudulent conservatorship. Your medical expert is under federal investigation. Your son-in-law is currently being fingerprinted by federal agents. We are finished." My father shook his head frantically, holding his hands up. No, please, you have to listen to me, he begged, his voice cracking with desperation. I made a mistake. I admit it. I let financial stress cloud my judgment. But you are my daughter. We share the same family blood. You cannot destroy my legacy over a misunderstanding. A misunderstanding, I repeated, stepping closer, letting the sheer force of my presence push him back against the marble wall. You declared me insane in front of our community. You conspired to have me heavily medicated and locked in a white room so you could steal my grandmother's commercial real estate to cover your bankruptcy. You used our church as a weapon to humiliate me. There was no misunderstanding. You knew exactly what you were doing. My father squeezed his eyes shut, fresh sweat rolling down his temples. I was desperate, he pleaded, dropping his hands to his sides. The supply chain issues ruined my dealership margins. The banks were squeezing me. I panicked. But you are the CEO of a multi-billion-dollar venture capital firm now. You have more money than I could ever comprehend. You do not need to liquidate my car dealerships. You can grant me a grace period. Give me 6 months to restructure the debt. You can refinance the loans. You can save my business. Please, Maya, I am your father. You cannot put your own father out on the street. I looked at the pathetic man begging for a bailout. This was the same man who had thrown me out of his house when I was 22 years old, struggling with severe depression, handing me garbage bags for my clothes, and telling me I was a useless disappointment. When I was sick, completely broke, and sleeping on other people's couches, you told me I was not your daughter, I said, my voice cutting through his desperate excuses like a scalpel. You told me survival was my own problem. You did not grant me a grace period when I was fighting for my mental health. You threw me away because I damaged your perfect community image. You only want to claim family blood now because my blood is currently tied to a bank account that owns your entire life. My father opened his mouth desperately, searching for a counter-argument, a manipulation tactic, or a guilt trip that might work. He found absolutely nothing. He was completely out of ammunition. He looked at me with wide, terrified eyes, waiting for his sentence. I smoothly reached into the inside pocket of my tailored blazer. I pulled out a sleek, matte black business card, embossed with heavy silver lettering. I held it out, pressing it firmly against my father's trembling chest, until he raised his shaking hand to take it. Contact my asset liquidation team. I instructed, delivering the final fatal blow, without a single ounce of mercy. They will be at your flagship dealership at exactly 8 o'clock tomorrow morning to chain the doors and collect the keys. I turned my back on his gasping, broken sobs. I did not look at Chloe, who had collapsed onto the hallway floor in a puddle of ruined designer fabric. I fell into step with my formidable legal team and pushed open the heavy glass exit doors. I walked out of the courthouse and stepped directly into the warm, blinding sunlight, breathing in the absolute, undeniable scent of total freedom. The crisp air that morning was just the beginning of a relentless storm that swept through my family over the next 3 weeks. Karma did not just knock on their doors. It kicked them down with heavy steel boots. My asset liquidation team arrived at my father's flagship dealership at exactly 8 o'clock following the trial. They brought heavy chains, padlocks, and a fleet of flatbed tow trucks. Marcus stood in the massive glass showroom, completely powerless as men in dark suits, methodically cataloged every single luxury vehicle, computer, and leather chair. The bank he owed his soul to belonged entirely to my holding company. He had spent my entire life calling me a failure, but he watched with his own eyes as my employees boarded up the very empire he had weaponized against me. Desperation strips a man of his pride very quickly. Having his physical assets seized was not enough to stop Marcus from trying to salvage his precious community standing. The very next Sunday, he put on his best tailored suit and drove his last remaining leased vehicle to our church. He expected to walk into the sanctuary, charm the elders, and play the victim of a ruthless corporate takeover. I expected the congregation to open their wallets and launch a relief fund to save their beloved patriarch. He walked through the heavy wooden doors of the vestibule and found Pastor Thomas waiting for him. The pastor was not alone. The entire board of church elders stood in a formidable line blocking the entrance to the main sanctuary. Pastor Thomas held a thick stack of printed papers in his hand. They were the unsealed court transcripts from the conservatorship trial. The community had read every single word. They read how Marcus had bribed a corrupt doctor to declare his own daughter insane. They read about the bounced checks to the youth building fund. They read about the $15 million secret bankruptcy and the illegal offshore transfers. Marcus Pastor Thomas said, his voice echoing loudly in the quiet vestibule, "You will not take another step into this house of worship. You used the name of the Lord to try and steal from your own child. You brought a spirit of greed and deception into our community. We do not want your excuses. We do not want your presence. You are no longer welcome here." My father looked around at the faces of the men and women he had manipulated for decades. Sister Jenkins stared at him with pure disgust. The elders turned their backs on him in unison. He was completely excommunicated from the only social circle that ever gave him power. He stumbled out of the church, stripped of his title, his wealth, and his fake black excellence. While my father was losing his community, my brother-in-law was losing his absolute freedom. Bradley was formally indicted on 27 counts of federal wire fraud and corporate embezzlement. The arrogant, condescending finance broker who had marched into my apartment demanding I surrender my grandmother's commercial real estate was denied bail due to the massive flight risk his offshore accounts presented. I attended his initial arraignment hearing just to watch the reality of his situation finally crush his unearned confidence. He was led into the federal courtroom wearing an oversized orange jumpsuit, his hands shackled to a chain wrapped tightly around his waist. The slick, expensive Italian wool suits were gone. The patronizing smirk was completely erased from his face. His high-priced defense attorneys could not save him from the mountain of irrefutable digital evidence my firm had handed directly to the Securities and Exchange Commission. The federal prosecutor stood up and outlined a staggering criminal enterprise that had defrauded hundreds of clients. Bradley looked pale, sick, and completely terrified as the judge read the potential sentencing guidelines. He was facing over 40 years in a federal penitentiary. The white corporate privilege he had constantly used to talk down to my family, to belittle me as an uneducated dropout, offered absolutely zero protection against the crushing weight of the federal justice system. I was going away for a very long time, and he knew it. With Bradley locked in a federal holding facility, the devastating consequences of his crimes crashed down directly onto Chloe. The government does not simply arrest the fraudster. They seize every single asset purchased with the stolen funds. Federal agents arrived at Chloe's breathtaking downtown penthouse with a stack of asset forfeiture warrants. My sister, who had built her entire identity around extreme materialism and golden child superiority, was forced to watch as agents boxed up her entire life. They confiscated the designer handbags she had bought on secret maxed-out credit cards. They seized her diamond jewelry, the imported sports cars, and the very deed to the luxury penthouse she loved to brag about. Her personal bank accounts were instantly frozen pending the federal investigation. Chloe sat on a cheap folding chair in the hallway outside her former penthouse, clutching a single medium-sized suitcase. It was the only bag the agents allowed her to pack with basic necessities. She pulled out her cell phone, her hands shaking violently. She scrolled through her contact list, desperately calling the affluent country club friends she had spent years trying to impress. Every single call went straight to voicemail. Her glamorous social circle had abandoned her the second the federal indictment hit the local news. She had absolutely nowhere left to go. Her father was bankrupt and disgraced. Her husband was facing decades behind bars. She stared blindly at her glowing phone screen, her vision completely blurred by genuine terrified tears rolling down her face. The carefully curated, flawless life she had repeatedly sacrificed me to protect was now completely gone. With fiercely trembling fingers, Chloe scrolled slowly to the very bottom of her extensive list of contacts. She took a ragged breath, pressed the green call button, and desperately dialed my number. My phone rang inside my quiet penthouse office, the caller ID flashing a number I had not saved, but recognized instantly. I let it ring 3 times before sliding my finger across the screen. I did not say hello, I simply waited. "Maya, please," Chloe gasped into the receiver, her voice completely stripped of the manufactured golden child perfection she had hidden behind her entire life. "I have nowhere to go. They took everything. The penthouse, the cars, my bank accounts. Dad is sleeping in a cheap motel by the highway. We have nothing left to eat. Please, you have to see us. I looked out through the floor-to-ceiling glass walls of my office, watching the city skyline glitter beneath the afternoon sun. I am at the corporate headquarters of ME Holdings, I replied, my tone flat and entirely detached. You have 1 hour to get here. Exactly 52 minutes later, the heavy mahogany doors of my executive suite swung open. My private security detail escorted my father and my sister into the room. The sight of them was a jarring testament to how fast karma operates when fueled by federal indictments and total bankruptcy. The arrogant patriarch and his flawless suburban princess were completely gone. Marcus wore a wrinkled, faded button-down shirt that hung loosely on his shrinking frame. The custom-tailored suits and diamond cufflinks he used to flaunt at church were seized by my liquidation team. Chloe looked even worse. Stripped of her frozen platinum cards and confiscated designer wardrobe, she wore a pair of plain gray sweatpants and a stained cotton shirt. She dragged the single, medium-sized suitcase the federal agents had allowed her to pack. They looked exactly like what they were: two desperate broke people who had destroyed their own lives through bottomless greed. They stood awkwardly on the plush Persian rug, staring at the sheer magnitude of my reality. My corner office was a breathtaking fortress of success. Modern art lined the walls, towering glass panels offered a panoramic view of the financial district, and a massive mahogany desk anchored the center of the room. I sat behind that desk wearing a tailored emerald suit, radiating the exact kind of untouchable authority my father had spent his entire life desperately pretending to possess. "Sit down," I commanded, gesturing to the two leather guest chairs positioned directly in front of my desk. They scrambled to obey, practically falling into the seats. They did not have the energy to demand respect. They did not have the leverage to mansplain financial literacy to me. They were completely and utterly broken. "Maya, we are so sorry." Chloe started gripping the armrests of her chair so tightly her knuckles turned white. "We lost everything. Bradley is gone. The feds took my engagement ring right off my finger. I had to take a public bus just to get to this building. We are starving, Maya. We are family. You have to help us." My father leaned forward, resting his shaking hands on his knees. He looked up at me with hollow, bloodshot eyes. He had aged 20 years in the span of 3 weeks. "I was wrong," Maya Marcus croaked, his voice lacking any of its former booming resonance. "I let pride and financial panic ruin my soul. I lost the dealerships. I lost my standing in the church. I am sleeping on a mattress that smells like mildew. I have absolutely zero cash to my name. You have an empire. Look at this office. Look at what you built. You have billions. We are just asking for a fraction of a percent to survive, just enough to get a small house and buy some groceries. We are begging you. Please show us the grace we failed to show you." I sat perfectly still, my hands resting calmly on the cool mahogany surface of my desk. I did not yell at them. I did not gloat or raise my voice to remind them of the decades of emotional abuse they subjected me to. I did not scream about the fake psychiatric evaluation or the painful years I spent surviving on instant noodles while they paraded around in luxury vehicles funded by stolen money. Anger requires emotional investment, and I had completely divested from these two people a long time ago. I simply looked at them with the cold, calculated precision of a chief executive officer evaluating a terrible investment. They were not apologizing because they felt remorse for treating me like a disposable failure. They were apologizing because they had run out of money and I was the only bank vault left in town. I slowly opened the top drawer of my heavy wooden desk. I reached inside and pulled out a single sleek black checkbook. The leather binding caught the afternoon sunlight streaming through the massive windows. My father's eyes widened. Chloe let out a shaky, desperate sigh of relief. They actually thought their pathetic last-minute performance had worked. They thought the strong, successful black woman sitting across from them would adhere to the toxic cultural expectation of bailing out abusive family members just because we shared the same genetics. They watched with bated breath as I uncapped my gold fountain pen. The only sound in the vast, quiet office was the sharp scratching of my pen against the crisp paper. I wrote out the date. I wrote out my father's full legally documented name in dark ink. I filled in the numeric box, wrote out the amount on the signature line, and signed my name with a swift, definitive flourish. I tore the check from the binding with a crisp rip. I placed the check flat on the polished mahogany wood. Using my index and middle fingers, I slowly slid the piece of paper across the vast expanse of the desk until it rested exactly in front of my father. Marcus practically lunged forward. His trembling hands eagerly snatched the check off the desk. He held it up to the light, desperate to see how many zeros I had written. He expected a lifeline. He expected enough capital to rent a luxury condo and start rebuilding his fake image. His eyes locked onto the ink. His mouth fell open. The tiny spark of hope that had illuminated his exhausted face died instantly, replaced by a look of sheer, unadulterated devastation. He stared at the numeric box, unable to comprehend the absolute finality of his punishment. Chloe leaned over his shoulder, her eyes widening in horror as she read the exact dollar amount I had authorized. It was a corporate check for exactly $2,000. "That is the monthly allowance you tried to force on me when you thought I was crazy," I said coldly, my voice echoing with absolute uncompromising finality in the quiet penthouse office. "Make it stretch. Security will escort you both out." The heavy glass doors of my executive suite slid shut, sealing away the pathetic sight of my father and sister being marched toward the freight elevators by my security team. That $2,000 check was the absolute final transaction between us. I wiped my hands of their toxic legacy and immediately turned my undivided attention to building my own. 6 months passed in a relentless, magnificent blur of construction, strategic planning, and unwavering execution. The property, my family had so desperately tried to steal the land. They foolishly branded a toxic asset, was completely unrecognizable. The sprawling estate from my grandmother no longer sat as an overgrown lot, waiting to be seized by opportunists. I had poured $75 million of capital directly into the soil, transforming the overgrown dirt into a towering state-of-the-art architectural masterpiece. The building was a stunning composition of dark steel, reinforced glass, and reclaimed mahogany wood that paid homage to our ancestors while pointing aggressively toward the future. This was not just a commercial office space. I had engineered a massive high-tech incubator and venture capital hub specifically designed to fund, mentor, and elevate Black female entrepreneurs. For decades, women who looked like me were systematically denied funding, mansplained in boardrooms by men like Bradley, and dismissed by a society that refused to recognize our brilliance. I built this empire to obliterate those barriers. My grandmother worked her hands to the bone to secure this land, and I was making absolutely certain her sacrifice fueled a generation of unstoppable, financially independent Black women who would never have to beg for a seat at any other table. The grand opening ceremony took place on a crisp, overcast Friday evening. The atmosphere was nothing like the suffocating performative family cookouts my father used to orchestrate to stroke his own fragile ego. There were no hypocritical church elders, no arrogant finance brokers, and no golden children parading around in stolen designer clothes. The sprawling main lobby was filled with genuine allies, loyal business partners, and the community members who had actually stood by me when I had absolutely nothing. Mr. Sterling, my lead corporate attorney, stood near the catered buffet, raising a glass of premium champagne in my direction. My executive assistant, the woman who had flawlessly orchestrated the federal takedown of my brother-in-law, was busy managing the press pool with razor-sharp efficiency. Soft neo-soul music drifted through the high-tech atrium, blending perfectly with the energetic hum of brilliant women, networking, securing funding, and launching their own empires. I walked through the crowd wearing a custom-tailored emerald gown that mirrored the fierce, unapologetic energy of the evening. Women approached me with tears in their eyes, pitching tech startups, green energy initiatives, and healthcare platforms. They were women who had been called difficult, dramatic, or incompetent by a world threatened by their potential. I funded 10 of them right there on the spot. This was the true definition of Black excellence. It was not a fake, polished facade used to hide financial ruin and domestic abuse. It was raw, powerful, and deeply rooted in lifting each other up. As the evening peaked, I stepped up to the podium positioned right in front of the massive mahogany ribbon suspended across the main entrance. The crowd fell into a respectful, highly anticipatory silence. I held a pair of oversized gold-plated scissors in my hands. I looked out at the faces of the brilliant women standing before me, knowing that the generational curse of my toxic biological family had been permanently broken. I was about to officially declare the incubator open for business, but my gaze inadvertently drifted past the cheering crowd, piercing straight through the floor-to-ceiling glass windows that faced the busy downtown street. Outside, a cold, heavy rain had begun to fall, washing the city sidewalks. In a gray, miserable gloom, standing on the opposite side of the bustling avenue, completely soaked by the freezing downpour, was my father. Marcus was unrecognizable from the arrogant, boastful patriarch who had tried to lock me in a psychiatric ward just 6 months ago. He was shivering inside a cheap, ill-fitting windbreaker that offered absolutely no protection against the bitter cold. He had no umbrella to shield him from the storm. He had no luxury vehicle waiting for him at the curb. He had no sycophantic followers hanging on to his every single word. He stood completely alone in the freezing rain, his shoulders slumped in total defeat, staring through the thick glass at the multi-million-dollar empire he had lost. He watched the daughter he had ruthlessly discarded, the woman he had publicly branded an embarrassment, standing at the absolute pinnacle of power and wealth. I did not look away. I wanted him to feel the full weight of his colossal mistakes burning into his memory. I held his gaze through the rain-slicked glass, letting him witness exactly what he could never touch. He looked pathetic, stripped of every single lie he had ever told. But the universe was not finished extracting its payment. The long arc of justice had finally caught up to his crimes. As my father stood there mourning his shattered ego, a sleek black-and-white police cruiser pulled up directly beside him, its tires splashing muddy water against his cheap pants. The vehicle lights flashed bright blue and red against the gloomy street. A uniformed police officer stepped out into the rain, placing a firm hand directly on his shoulder. The officer informed him he needed to come downtown immediately for questioning regarding the ongoing federal medical fraud and bribery investigation. My father dropped his head, completely surrendered, and allowed the officer to guide him towards the back of the cruiser. He did not fight back or resist. I watched the heavy doors lock behind him, sealing his fate forever. He had built his own prison brick by brick. I watched the red and blue taillights of the police cruiser fade into the gray, rain-slicked streets of the financial district. The flashing colors dissolved into the gloomy distance, taking the very last remaining shadow of my past along with them. I did not feel a single drop of pity. I turned away from the floor-to-ceiling glass window and walked back toward the center of the magnificent atrium. The warm, golden lighting of the incubator washed over me, instantly melting away the cold reality of the storm outside. The heavy chains of my toxic history were permanently broken. The crowd of brilliant, driven women parted respectfully as I approached the main stage. Mr. Sterling caught my eye and offered a subtle, deeply respectful nod, acknowledging the absolute victory we had secured. I stepped up onto the elevated platform and adjusted the microphone stand. The ambient neo-soul music gently faded out, leaving a thick, anticipatory silence in its wake. Hundreds of faces looked up at me. These were not the judgmental church elders who only valued superficial status and empty titles. These were actual innovators, creators, and survivors. They were the undeniable future of our community. Thank you all for being here tonight. I began, my voice echoing clearly and steadily across the vast high-tech space. We are standing on soil that was paid for by the sweat, tears, and ultimate sacrifice of my grandmother. For a very long time I was told that I was a permanent stain on her legacy. I was branded a college dropout, an embarrassment and a failure by people who wore expensive tailored suits to church but hid massive moral and financial bankruptcies behind their closed doors. They weaponized the beautiful concept of Black excellence, using it as a heavy club to beat down anyone who did not conform to their toxic, image-obsessed expectations. They demanded perfection while secretly drowning in their own corruption. I looked out over the crowd, making direct eye contact with the young entrepreneurs I had funded just an hour ago. But true Black excellence has absolutely nothing to do with the brand of luxury car you drive or the designer label stitched into your jacket collar. It is not about crushing your own family members to maintain a flawless suburban facade for the neighbors. Real excellence is built in the dark when nobody is clapping for you. It is built on uncompromising integrity, fierce resilience, and the relentless courage it takes to break heavy generational curses. We are not here to perform for anyone. We are here to build massive empires that will outlast us all. The room erupted into deafening applause. Women cheered enthusiastically, raising their glasses high into the air. I let the beautiful sound wash over me, feeling the profound, undeniable truth of my own words. I thought back to the scared 22-year-old girl standing on her parents' porch with a single suitcase, crying as the front door slammed in her face. I thought about the grueling years of eating cheap meals, teaching myself corporate finance late into the night, and quietly buying up toxic debt while my father and sister paraded around in stolen luxury. The journey from the discarded scapegoat to the unshakable chief executive officer was brutal, but it forged my spirit into solid steel. Looking out at the sea of supportive, genuine faces, a profound realization settled deep into my bones. Society conditions us to believe that blood is an unbreakable bond, that we owe our abusers endless loyalty simply because we share a biological last name. But family is not defined by biology. Family is defined by who genuinely protects you when you are at your most vulnerable. Family is the executive assistant who flawlessly executes a shadow investigation to save your assets. Family is the legal team that stands like an impenetrable fortress between you and a fraudulent psychiatrist. Family is a room full of brilliant women lifting each other up. I had not lost my family. I had finally found it. I stepped down from the podium and walked over to the thick velvet ribbon draped across the entrance of the main venture capital wing. A hush fell over the crowd as I lifted the heavy gold-plated scissors. With one swift, decisive motion, I sliced through the fabric. The ribbon fell away, officially opening the doors to a future I had built entirely on my own terms. The applause roared again, louder this time, filled with pure, unadulterated joy. Waiters circulated through the smiling crowd, carrying silver trays lined with crystal flutes of expensive vintage champagne. I took a glass and walked back toward the massive windows. The severe storm outside had finally broken, leaving the city streets glistening beautifully under the warm glow of the streetlights. My abusers had lost everything to their own insatiable greed. My father was currently sitting alone in a cold concrete federal holding cell, waiting for his arraignment. My brother-in-law was facing decades in federal prison. My sister was stripped of her fake wealth and left entirely alone to face the devastating, miserable reality of her own empty choices. They tried to bury me in the dark, completely forgetting that I was a powerful seed ready to bloom. I raised my crystal glass, the golden bubbles sparkling under the magnificent chandeliers of my multi-million-dollar empire. I smiled a deep, warm, and profoundly peaceful smile. I had secured my absolute freedom. I had successfully protected my grandmother's sacred legacy from the very people who wanted to exploit it for their own selfish gain. I had achieved complete and total justice without ever having to compromise my own moral integrity. The ultimate sweet revenge is not just watching your cruel enemies fall into the traps they set for you. It is living a brilliantly beautiful life they can never touch, surrounded by people who love you for exactly who you are. Maya's powerful journey proves that blood does not define family. True family is built on respect and protection. When toxic relatives weaponize love to manipulate you, walking away is the ultimate act of survival. You owe absolutely no loyalty to your abusers. Genuine excellence is not a flawless facade hiding moral ruin. It is forged through resilience, integrity, and breaking heavy generational curses. Your true worth is never dictated by those incapable of seeing your brilliance. If you have ever walked away from toxic relatives to protect your peace, please share your empowering story below and subscribe for more content.